This morning I'm spending time talking with Dr. Stephen Ragusea about the common colds of mental health, depression, and anxiety. Now, we just spoke about anxiety, specifically panic attacks, but I want to take some time right now to talk about different models of depression.
Okay. You can look at depression in a number of different ways. When Sigmund Freud first did his explorations and wrote his books, he talked about depression being a combination of anger and fear. So it was as if the individual was angry at someone outside themselves, but turned that anger inward toward themselves. Okay? So that was the Freudian basic model of what depression was. And that has applicability for some people. Another model of depression has to do with what's called learned helplessness.
Okay.
There was a guy named Marty Seligman, who was a brilliant graduate student when he explored a model of helplessness, or a model of depression called learned helplessness. And what Marty did was he took these rats and he put them in cages. And then what he did was he electrified the floor of the cage. And then what he did was he watched to see what the rats would do. Okay. And the rats would feel this very uncomfortable feeling coming from the floor of the cage, and they'd try and escape. So what they'd do is they'd dig in the floor, or they'd try and climb up the walls, and eventually they realized that they could climb out of the cage by climbing up to the top of the wall. And then they'd leap out and be free from the pain. But then Marty did a terrible thing to these rats, which probably wouldn't be allowed anymore. But what he did was he put a cage lid on top of the cage, so that the rats would feel this electrical aversive stimulus, and they'd try and escape, and they'd dig and they dig and they dig and they dig, and they'd climb and they climb and they climb, but they couldn't get out. And then what they did was really odd.
What?
What they did was a variety of different things. Some of them stopped eating. Some of them did nothing but eat. Some of them only drank water until they became bloated. Some of them didn't drink any water and became dehydrated. Some of them would chew their own legs off. Some of them would kill other rats in the cage. Some of them would just lie on the floor of the cage looking for all the world like a depressed rat. Okay? And Dr. Seligman called this experience, what he was observing, learned helplessness. Essentially, these rats learned that there was nothing they could do about their bad condition of life. And so they reacted to that sense of helplessness by engaging in a variety of different behaviors, some of which were bizarre or violent, as a response to that helplessness. And that's one way to look at depression. When people are in a very unpleasant job situation, for example, or a very unhappy marriage, or children who are being parented in a very bad way by parents who fight all the time or abuse them, what happens is they show signs of learned helplessness, and they act like depressed people as well as like depressed rats. That model of depression has a lot of applicability. Another model of depression has to do with what's called endogenous depression. The model we just talked about is really what's called situational depression, meaning it comes from a particular life situation. Endogenous depression is believed to come from the biological person. In other words, how their brain is wired, how their body chemistry is functioning. What we know is that there are some people who tend to get depressed for no apparent reason. And for those people, particularly when they suffer from very severe depression, antidepressants can work wonders. And as a group, they're a relatively safe kind of medication. However, contrary to what they show you on TV, we don't really know how they work. We've got theories about how antidepressants work, but nobody really knows what it is that makes somebody undepressed. Just like we don't really know what makes somebody depressed in the first place. There are theories about it. There's some biological evidence of different kinds of problems and psychological evidence of other kinds of problems. But we don't really know it that well. What we do know is that we can cure depression and anxiety very effectively using psychotherapy all by itself, and sometimes combining psychotherapy with medication.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. And people can visit you at your practice, right? Are you taking new patients?
On a selective basis,
On a
yes.
selective basis.
Both my son and I are clinical psychologists here in Key West, and I think we're the only father-son team in Florida.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're going to talk about that on another show, what it's like working with your son, right?
Okay.
Day in and day out. Well, thank you so much again for sharing all of this with our viewers this morning.
Thank you all.
We have to take a quick break. I'll be right back, though, after these messages. Stay with me.